everyone, my name is John Sierra, and I am a Tolkien scholar. I have been studying the works of J.R.R. Tolkien for decades, and I'm here to answer all of your questions about The Hobbit, or The Lord of the Rings, or the Silmarillion, or any of his other works. And we have a lot to get to. I chose 22 questions this week, which is quite a lot. I try to choose like around 15 or so. When I do these videos, I look back at all the questions that I've answered on Quora, which you can find a link to my Quora account in the description, and I just choose which ones are going to be in a video. And sometimes there's just so many great questions that I have to choose a lot of them, and this is one of those weeks. So I'm not going to bore you with too much preamble. We're going to get into the reading, and then we're going to get into your questions. And of course, if you have a question for me, you can feel free to ask it right in a comment. I will respond to you as best as I can. If you want to be featured in a video, ask your question on Quora. Like I said, there is a link in the description. Just tag me in it. Very easy to do. If you ask any sort of Tolkien or Legendarium related question in Quora, it's going to give you recommended people that you can ask. I'm going to be on that list. I'm going to be like the first person on that list probably, and then the people right below me are people that I all know. So anyway, let's do a little bit of reading. I'm going to read to you from Beren and Lúthien, and in this one I decided to go into the poetical the Lay of Lúthien sort of section here, and I had read a bit of this at one point, more towards the beginning. It's a very, very long poem. I'm actually starting here. I'm going to start here at line 313. So I'll give you a bit of this. Thus Huan spoke, who never before had uttered words, but twice more, did speak in elven tongue again. Lady beloved, whom all men, who elfiness and all whom all things, with fur and fell and feathered wings, should serve and love, arise away. Put on thy cloak before the day comes over Nargothrond we fly. To northern perils thou and I. And ere he ceased to counsel wrought, for achievement of the thing they sought, there Lúthien listened in amaze, and softly on Huan did she gaze. Her arms about his neck she cast, in friendship that to death should last. In Wizard's Isle still lay forgot, enmeshed and tortured in that grot, cold, evil, doorless, without light, and blank-eyed stared at endless night. Two comrades, now alone they were. The others lived no more, but bare, their broken bones would lie and tell how 10 had served their master well. To Felagund then Beren said, "'Twere little loss if I were dead. And I am minded all to tell, and thus, perchance, from this dark hell, thy life to lose I set thee free, from thine old oath, for more for me thou hast endured than e'er was earned. Ah, Beren, hast not learned that promises of Morgoth's folk are frail as breath. From this dark yoke of pain shall neither ever go, whether he learn our names or no, with Thu's consent. Nay, more, I think, yet deeper of torment we should drink. Knew he that son of Barahir and Felagund were captive here, and even worse if he should know the dreadful errand we did go. A devil's laugh they ringing heard, within their pit, true the word. I hear you speak, a voice then said, 'twould little loss if he were dead, the outlaw mortal, but the king. The elf undying, many a thing, no man can suffer, may endure, perchance, when what those walls immure of dreadful anguish thy folk learn, their king to ransom they will yearn, with gold and gem and high hearts cowed, or maybe Celagorm the proud will deem a rival's prison cheap, and crown and gold himself will keep. Perchance the errand I shall know, ere all is done that ye did go. The wolf is hungry, the hour is nigh, no more need Beren wait to die. The slow time passed, and in the gloom 2 eyes there glowed. He saw his doom. Beren, silent as his bonds he strained, beyond his mortal might enchained. Lo, sudden there was a rending sound of chains that parted and unwound, of meshes broken. Forth there leaped upon the wolfish thing that crept. In shadow faithful Felagund, careless of fang or mortal wound. There in the dark they wrestled slow, remorseless, snarling to and fro. Teeth in flesh, gripe on throat, fingers locked in shaggy coat, spurning Beren, whom there lying, heard the werewolf gasping, dying. Then a voice he heard, farewell, on earth I need no longer dwell. Friend and comrade, Beren bold, my heart is burst, my limbs are cold. Here all my power I have spent to break my bonds in dreadful rent of poisoned teeth is in my breast. Now I must go to my long rest. Neath Timbren ting in timeless halls, where drink the gods, where the light falls. Upon the shining sea thus died the king, as elvish harpers yet do sing. There Beren lies, his grief no tear, his despair no horror, has no fear, waiting for footsteps, a voice for doom. Silence is profounder than the tomb of long-forgotten kings, neath years, and sands uncounted laid on biers, and buried everlasting deep, slow and unbroken round him creep. So if you've read the Silmarillion and you're familiar with the story of Beren and Lúthien, this is the part where Beren was chained up, and Finrod Felagund was with him. That's Galadriel's eldest brother, and he was the king at that point, and he saved Beren from death, from dying at the hands of one of Sauron's werewolves, and he killed the werewolf, but then he died shortly after, and Beren was able to escape. And notice they mentioned Thu. Thu was the necromancer, and the original sort of name of the character that would eventually become Sauron. Before that, it was Tevildo, who was a cat, and then Tevildo got replaced with Thu, and Thu eventually sort of evolved in the writing into Sauron. So, if you read the novel form of Beren and Lúthien, you get all these different versions, and you read about Tevildo, and you read about Thu, and then there's Sauron, and then there's parts at the back of it where it's more akin to the Silmarillion. Some of the text, I believe, even is from the Silmarillion. But anyway, we're going to get to your questions now. So here we go. Let's go to the first question. Why did Eärendil decide to travel through the skies every day to take the Silmaril through space? So yeah, this question got asked, and there were a lot of people who jumped in and answered it very hastily, who all gave some sort of variation that Eärendil, being in the sky in his ship, was some sort of form of punishment. That this is what he had to do as sort of a repentance for sailing to the west when he really wasn't allowed to do so, and that's actually not the case. Eärendil was not punished by the Valar by being forced to fly through the sky in a ship with the Silmaril. That's not quite really a very good punishment when you come to think about it. When he came to the west, Namo Mandos wasn't happy that Manwë allowed Eärendil and Elwing to live in Aemon, so he had his say in another way. They would have to choose mortality or immortality, as would their children. They both chose mortality, but with one caveat: they were no longer allowed to go back to the lands of mortals. This was the punishment. They were severed from their kin. They could not return to Middle-earth, and they could not go to Númenor later on. Eärendil actually did return to Middle-earth at one point because he fought in the War of Wrath, but he was doing this with the blessing of the Valar, and he stayed in his flying ship. He technically did not walk the land, so that was sort of a loophole, and the Valar were okay with it. However, Eärendil still wished to be the hope of elves and men and to inspire them. And he is a mariner and an explorer at heart, and he has a magic flying ship made out of Mithril. So from the sky, he could see his kin from a distance, and they could see him and know that he's up there. We saw that in Númenor. They would look up to the sky, and they would say, there is the father of our first king Elros, there is Eärendil. In The Lord of the Rings, when Galadriel revealed her ring of power to Frodo, she held up her hand to the star of Eärendil and revealed the ring, and then she asked Sam if Sam saw the ring, and he said, no, I saw the star, but I did not see a ring. So Eärendil is an important symbol for Middle-earth. It's a symbol of light and hope, and that's why he's up there. Okay, next question. Okay, so this question says, who was the wife of Elendil? So, sadly, Tolkien never gave us a name for Elendil's wife. She was never mentioned, and she was never given a name. Elendil's wife may not have been mentioned, but he surely had a wife, because he had sired 2 sons, Isildur and Anarion. But her name was never written down by Tolkien or any of his characters. This is actually pretty on brand for Númenor. Rarely are the names of the wives of kings recorded unless they play some sort of important role in the plot, such as Pharazôn taking Tarmiriel as his wife by force in her heartbreaking climb to the top of Númenor to try to escape the Akallabêth. And then there was Tar Aldarion, who famously had a divorce from his wife Eärendil, and it was he who changed the laws of Númenor to allow women to be ruling queens, though neither Gondor nor Arnor continued this tradition. We also see with the elves of the woodland realms, such as Greenwood the Great, later became Mirkwood, and later still the wood of green leaves, King Ondafur had an unnamed wife, and so did his son, King Thranduil. So that's why when people ask, who was Legolas's mother? Well, we don't actually know. What happened to her? Well, we don't actually know. She may have been, during the Hobbits, she might have been sitting there right next to Thranduil and it was never mentioned, or she would have been in the wine room, or she could have sailed west, or something like that. So we really don't know a lot of the sort of incidental characters unless they actually play a part in the story itself. So we don't know who Elendil's wife was, sadly. Okay, next question. What is the recommended amount of knowledge about Tolkien's universe before reading the Silmarillion? What is the best approach to reading it? I can't really speak to knowledge, but perhaps experience is what you want. Before you read the Silmarillion, you should read both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, at the least. And, you know, they say the Silmarillion is not an easy read, and that's correct. But this doesn't mean that you should be intimidated by it, just that you should know that going in, that you should be prepared for that. I recommend not only having read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, but several times. And when I say The Lord of the Rings, I mean the entirety of it, including all of the appendices. The info-dump nature of these appendices may be off-putting to some, but this is a good preparation for the Silmarillion, which is not really a novel, it's more of a chronicle of lore. Someone once remarked to me that reading the Silmarillion is like reading the Bible, and no, they're not wrong. The Silmarillion moves at an incredibly fast pace, and it could be jarring. Gone are the loving descriptions of scenery and the copious dialogue. Instead, it is event after event. The War of Wrath, a conflict that lasted 40 years and destroyed an entire section of Middle-earth, it's barely a page in the Silmarillion. This is due to a very important fact. The Silmarillion is not finished and never will be. I personally recommend reading Unfinished Tales first, as you get a bit of the Lord of the Rings style, novelized storytelling mixed in with some of the Silmarillion style, and some very unique information as well. The story Antur and his coming to Gondolin was an unfinished final version of the story The Fall of Gondolin, which would have been integrated into the Silmarillion had it been finished. The Children of Húrin also starts and ends there, unless you get the standalone novel, of course. There's the middle section is in the Silmarillion, and there's even a part that says, read this part of the Silmarillion, then you come back here. So really, the two books go together. The Silmarillion is a challenging read, but it's a rewarding one. If you can't get through it in one go, there's nothing to be ashamed of. Almost nobody does. Some people have recommended the audio version. I can't speak to that because I've never in my life listened to an audiobook, but that's something you might want to try. Next question. Who was the fairest of all the elves? Of course, with fairest meaning most beautiful, because whenever Tolkien said fair, he really meant beautiful. Lúthien, of course. Any other answer might make Tolkien's spirit very angry, and you wouldn't like him when he's angry. Tolkien described that the most beautiful woman to ever walk in Middle-earth was Melian. though she was not an elf. She did have an elf for a daughter, as she married Ilúthingel, so Lúthien, her daughter, was the most fair of all the elves, though Arwen was said to resemble her greatly. The story of Beren and Lúthien was inspired greatly by the romance of the author J.R.R. Tolkien and his wife Edith. He never called her Lúthien, but he proclaimed that she was in fact his Lúthien, and he was her Beren, and the names are inscribed on their shared gravestone. Next question. What were the factors that contributed to the weakness of Saruman's army in The Lord of the Rings? So there's actually a lot of factors, but the main thing that you have to understand is that Saruman was just kind of bad at war. He was not very good at what he was trying to do. He had some early victories against Rohan because it was a surprise attack. Theoden was under the thrall of Saruman through his proxy Grima Wormtongue. Saruman successfully took the Westfold in a surprise attack, and Grima made sure that Erkenbrand, who was the Lord of the Westfold, his plea for more troops never reached the king's ear. So with the arrival of Gandalf and the expulsion of Grima from the side of the king, Saruman didn't really stand much of a chance. So I'm going to give you a short list. I'm going to give you 5 things. It's not an exhaustive list of all of Saruman's errors that he made, but I'm going to give you 5, I think, very big mistakes that he made that contributed to him... Bless me. That contributed to him losing. So, for one, he bred an army, and he fed an army, but he didn't seem to actually train his army. Instead, he banked on just having great numbers and the stature and savagery of the Uruk-hai to win for him. They were very easily stymied by simple barriers. 2, he had no commanders. He didn't go himself to the battle, and he didn't seem to have field commanders, so his troops lacked leadership and were unable to deal with any sort of changing circumstances. 3, he did not account for the Ents attacking Isengard. He left his home completely unprotected while his army was away. 4, his army seemed to lack discipline. Aside from training, they were just kind of on their own, and they just did whatever they felt like doing. They stopped to pillage when they really shouldn't have, and that wasted time and prevented them from waylaying Theoden's people before they were able to successfully entrench themselves at Helm's Deep. And 5, Saruman, at one point before the battle, was actually invited to sit at the fire and just hang out with Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas. They didn't know who he was. They thought he was just some random old man, and they said, "Come sit with us." What does he do? Does he sit and learn all sorts of things from Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas about what they're doing, about the ring? You know, he could have used his voice and tried to cajole some information out of them. No, he spooks their horses and then runs away. So his pride and his arrogance made him believe that he could just steamroll Rohan with very little experience in war under his belt and very little effort put into it, to be honest. And he put all of his troops into one attack force and was left with nothing when they lost. So let's just say that I would love to get Saruman into a game of Sid Meier's Civilization. Okay, next question. Did Tolkien ever consider making a movie adaptation out of the Silmarillion? What was the reasons for not doing so? So we have to consider, of course, that he never finished the book, and it was published after he died. So I find it unlikely, though not impossible, that he would have considered such a thing. Tolkien was interested in movie adaptations of his work, and he was eager to have both the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings adapted into films, though he had this policy, art or cash. That was his attitude, meaning that either they would have to pay him a rather large sum of money to look the other way and let them adapt his work as they see fit, or he was willing to sell the rights at a much lower amount if he had a say in how it all turned out, to make sure that it was done to his standard. Tolkien sold the rights to both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings in the 1960s, but he didn't live long enough to see the adaptations that were made out of either of them. The only adaptation that was made during his lifetime was the 1966 version of The Hobbit, which was an ashcan, sort of a copyright trick that was never released, and I have a reaction to the entire thing on my channel. You should look that up. And it was only shown once to a room full of people in New York City, and it was thought lost for the longest time and turned up on the internet much later on. So I would say that it's nearly impossible that Tolkien would have ever seen the 1966 Hobbit, and he may not have even been aware of its existence. So that's not to say that he didn't at some point imagine that the Silmarillion would be a movie or movies. His original intent was to publish the Silmarillion alongside The Lord of the Rings, which he at that point was calling the entire thing the Saga of the Three Jewels and the Rings of Power. So that was his intent, but of course the publisher rejected that. They didn't want to publish the Silmarillion. They were only interested in The Lord of the Rings. So he took the Silmarillion and just kept tinkering with the book and endlessly revising it and reworking it, right up until the point where he died. So it was never really finished. And without a publication deal for the Silmarillion, he had no deadline, and he procrastinated in writing it, and he endlessly tried to perfect writing it, and he started over from scratch at several different points. The published Silmarillion, which was edited by his son Christopher, was cobbled together from various drafts and published after his death. So it's not impossible to say that he would have thought of a movie or movies. It's just not very likely. Next question. Where can the most complete or last version of the Dagor Dagorath be read? Nowhere really. Dagor Dagorath is not really a story. It's a mention of a possible prophecy. There's no final or complete version of Dagor Dagorath, and it is not a story that Tolkien wrote or planned on writing. It started as an idea for a prophecy of the final battle, a mixture of revelation and Ragnarok that would be put into the Silmarillion as the second prophecy of Mandos. The prophecy was going to be the last thing in the Silmarillion. It was going to end with this prophecy saying this is what's going to happen and this is how the world's going to end. It wasn't really a story. But when it came time to edit the book after the author's death, Christopher Tolkien decided to leave it out, based on a note that his father wrote that there was no prophecy of the end of the world that was known to the Valar. So Christopher came to believe that his father had abandoned the idea, though several orphan references to a final battle are in the Silmarillion. But of course, as I mentioned, the book is unfinished. So if you study the text, it kind of shows that Dagor Dagorath is not really compatible with the Silmarillion, and that was pointed out by Christopher himself in Morgoth's Ring, at least not in the way that it was originally envisioned. The last version of it had it as a legend among mortal men, not elves, and it was a prophecy made by the wise woman Andreth. And she predicted the return of Turin, but not to battle Morgoth, but to battle Ancalagon. And of course that didn't happen. It was Eärendil and the eagles that battled the dragon. So it is possible that in universe, Dagor Dagorath is a mimetic legend among mortals who may have had their own twist on the War of Wrath. Oh, by the way, that question came in from Huam. Next question. Was Aragorn supposed to be at the Prancing Pony, or was it just pure coincidence for him to be there to help Frodo? He was supposed to be there, and so was Frodo. Frodo was just running late. Gandalf intended initially to join Frodo at Crickhollow and start the journey to Rivendell with him. And I'm going to get into that in the thumbnail question a bit later, but he was being called away to Isengard to see Saruman. He drafted a letter to Frodo insisting that he leave as soon as possible and meet a man named Strider at the Prancing Pony in Bree. Gandalf even included instruction on how to ensure that he is speaking to the real Strider and not an imposter. His real name is Aragorn, and he should be carrying a broken sword. Frodo, of course, was late because he didn't get the letter. The letter was left with Barlam and Butterbur, and Barlaman just forgot to send it. Thankfully, Frodo got a move on when one of the Nazgûl showed up in Hobbiton, and he overheard its conversation with Hamfast Gamgee. Aragorn, concerned that Frodo was running late, actually went out looking for him, but saw Frodo traveling with Tom Bombadil and knew that he was in safe hands, so he returned to the Prancing Pony to meet with Frodo. Okay, next question. How did Gandalf meet Bilbo? What led Gandalf to invite Bilbo on his adventures? So Gandalf actually met Bilbo when he was very young, though Bilbo scarcely remembered him. Gandalf had been traveling to and through the Shire for quite a while and was fascinated with hobbits, particularly the Baggins family and the Took family. He met a very young Bilbo who had dreams of adventure, though of course he grew up and he kept those dreams quite private. When he was in need of a hobbit burglar for the adventure, he thought of Bilbo, as he had the correct mixture of sensible Baggins and fiery Took that would be perfect for his needs. At the start of The Hobbit, when Gandalf comes to Bagshot Row and has his initial conversation with Bilbo, he was actually returning to look specifically for him. He had been there a few days earlier, and Bilbo was off in the woods searching for elves. This is a big part of the reason that Gandalf knew that Bilbo's sensible facade was just that, a facade. Even at the age of 50, he was still wandering off looking to meet elves. Okay, next question. Okay, I love this one because any question to do with the linguistic aspect is my very favorite aspect of studying the Legendarium, and I find this one to be very interesting. For the Lord of the Rings, what is the name that the hobbits called the Shire in their own language? So they would have called it Suzat. The Hobbitish language was a dialect of Westron, or the common speech, which itself was a derivative of Adunaic, which was a language that was brought over from Númenor. It became widespread in Middle-earth, while the official languages of Gondor and Arnor were Sindar and Elvish. They used these mostly for official documents, formal occasions. The common speech became a universal language that was understood by everyone. So, Tolkien scholar Andreas Mohn once suggested that the root word of Suza, the za part, would be related to the Adunaic Zion, which means country or land, or in rural English you would say Shire. So the T at the end, Suza becoming Suzat, would mean that it's not just Shire, but it is the Shire, especially in that scene where Gandalf was speaking to Radagast, and Radagast said, I was told to come looking for you in some country with an uncouth name such as Shire, and he said, it's the Shire. So it's not Suza, it's Suzat. So that's the Westron Hobbitish dialect. That's the way that they would refer to it. And of course, in translating it to English, Tolkien would say, well, I found it means country, and since it's sort of an English rural analog like a shire, we will call it the Shire. Okay, next question. Okay, so this is a really good question that came in from Jason Gray, who asked, if the ages of Middle-earth change after major events, why did the sinking of Númenor and the breaking of the world not mark the beginning of a new age? So like I said, excellent question, and there's sort of two answers, but they're also sort of the same answer in a way. The first answer here is the thematic one. All of the ages start with the downfall of a great evil. Now, you could argue that Númenor had become quite corrupt, and Pharazôn was himself a great evil, but the real evil here, of course, was Sauron, and the Second Age ended with his defeat, just as the First Age ended with Morgoth's defeat, and the Third Age would end with Sauron's second defeat. Though some would say, that the actual start date of the Fourth Age was when Elrond sailed west, and that led to some different calendars. The second reason here is the practical one. No one that was on Númenor, other than Sauron, actually survived the Akallabêth. And while the effects were worldwide on a geological level, the Númenorians that were still around had already left Númenor, and they were approaching Middle-earth, or they were already in Middle-earth, and they were busy setting up their new kingdoms, and they did not wish to start a new calendar yet. Speaking realistically, the ages start and end when people generally agree that they should do so, and this always happens at time of great victory, which goes back to the first answer. Gondor and Arnor were not in a position at this point where they felt that they had a great victory and they should start a new age. And it wasn't long before they discovered that Sauron was still around, and they had their hands full with a lot of different things, and they didn't have time to say, let's have a new calendar. So really, that's what it is. It always comes at a time of great victory, and the Akallabêth was certainly not that. Okay, next question. Okay, so this is an interesting question. What is the reason for the existence of good and bad elves in J.R.R. Tolkien's universe? So obviously free will plays a part here. I would say it's 1 part free will and 2 parts Melkor. So first, to address the idea of free will, there, of course, could be elves that are good, and there are elves that could be bad. And Elrond pointed out in The Lord of the Rings that nothing is evil in the beginning, not even Sauron. By extension, through study of Tolkien's text, we see that evil is always a choice. When we see bad elves like Feanor or Eöl or Maeglin, they all had their choices to make, and they made the bad choices, and each suffered the consequences of those choices. However, of course, evil was something that sprang from Melkor, who during the Song of Creation, the Ainulindala, sang themes discordant to those of the creator, Ilúvatar, and thus he created the concepts of discord, evil, chaos. Ilúvatar told him that none could alter the music in his despite. All power granted to Melkor, who was the mightiest among the Ainur, was granted by his own grace. Thus, evil is necessary, as stated in the Silmarillion. Melkor created bitter cold, but he gave the word snowflakes. This brings us back to the Ainulindala and the words of God, who stated that in trying to rebel against his creator, Melkor will only create things more wondrous and beautiful that he couldn't even conceive. We see Melkor directly pull the strings in cases like Feanor, whose mind was marred by the Dark Lord, or Maeglin, who gave up the location of Gondolin willingly out of lust for his cousin Idril, following the false promises of Melkor. Everything evil traces its roots back to Melkor. But even that is traced to Ilúvatar, who knew that without darkness, light has no meaning. Without danger, there's no courage, and so on and so on. So it does become a philosophical discussion at some point, but that's really it. There's free will, and there's the creation of evil through the satanic figure of the Legendarium, Melkor. Okay, next question. So this next question is very popular lately. A lot of people asked me a variation of this, so I'm just picking one randomly. From where or how did Saruman figure out how to make fire breach stone at Helm's Deep? Was it just common knowledge among wizards? So he used a mysterious substance that is only ever referred to as the Fire of Orthanc, though I have a theory. The Fire of Orthanc was some sort of explosive substance that was said to have been invented by Saruman. In the film versions of The Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson interpreted the Fire of Orthanc as being something akin to black powder or gunpowder, which is a valid interpretation based off of the very little information that we have. It is said to be specifically a devilry of Saruman, but I think he may have gotten the idea actually from Gandalf. Saruman looked down on Gandalf, but he also envied him and the way that everyone loved him. And at one of the White Council meetings, Gandalf was sitting there smoking his pipe. He was puffing away the entire time, and Saruman pulled him aside afterwards and chided him about wasting time with these silly inventions rather than taking part in the meeting. Of course, Saruman didn't like it when Gandalf actually took part in the meeting, so he's sort of a big hypocrite in that way. But he found the smoking to be distracting, and Gandalf said that he didn't invent smoking. It was something that the Hobbits of the Shire came up with. And as we learned in The Two Towers, Saruman had a smoking habit of his own, but he kept it secret. He secretly imported pipeweed from the Shire, and we learned in Unfinished Tales that Saruman took many personal trips to the Shire in disguise, and many of the hobbits there did not realize that he was a different person than Gandalf. The text even states that Saruman's secret trips are part of the reason that Gandalf's reputation in the Shire started to suffer. Saruman was up to no good, and they thought he was Gandalf. So that being said, what is the one big thing that all hobbits associate with Gandalf? Fireworks. Now, I wouldn't put it past Saruman to discover the fireworks, and figuring out how they work, and then figuring out how to weaponize them, and that might have been where the Fire of Orthanc came from. Or at least that's my best theory. Okay, next question. Would Would hobbits be classified as humans if Tolkien's Middle-earth existed in reality? If we were to classify a hobbit, they would essentially be an evolutionary offshoot of men, as they essentially are that in Tolkien's work. Hobbits didn't appear in any historical chronicle until the Third Age, but it's likely that they've been around longer, like in the Second Age. Pippin asserts to Treebeard that they have been around longer than most people think, and Tolkien called them an ancient race. It was mentioned that hobbits are cousins, so to speak, and they're related to the race of mortal men. They're called halflings or perionoth by the elves, which means both of those phrases mean half man, because their height was half that of a man or an elf. Now, obviously, there are differences other than height. They have very hairy feet with thick leathery soles, they have pointed ears, and their lifespan is greater than that of man. It doesn't reach the heights of the blessed Dunedain or the mortal Perithel, the half-elves, but their lifespan, the hobbit's lifespan being around 100 years old, it does exceed that of the average low man of Middle-earth. So I've actually written extensively on the possible origins of hobbits, and I have my own theories, but to boil it down, it was mentioned by Bilbo that there was a local legend that a Took ancestor married a fairy. He dismisses this as hogwash, but while hobbits use fairy to refer to various people such as elves and spirits, and their near-universal migration to lands bordering those of Tom Bombadil and more pressingly Goldberry, the coupling of a mortal man and some sort of heathen spirit akin to Goldberry may have created the hobbit race. If they existed in real life, they would essentially be seen as a parallel and possibly a competing offshoot of men in the Homo genus, but a different species. Okay, next question. Did the Ents have the power to destroy Isengard? If so, why didn't they do it to protect Middle-earth? Well, they did. They pretty much did. Destroyed, keep in mind when you say destroyed, it doesn't mean erased. But they wrecked it. They wrecked Isengard. The Ents did one heck of a number on Isengard. They broke up the wall. They destroyed a lot of the buildings, though they left Orthanc alone. They flooded it by breaking the dams that Saruman had set up. When Gandalf, Theoden, Gimli, and Legolas and all of them arrived at Isengard, they were treated to Merry and Pippin enjoying themselves in the ruin of Isengard. It was a ruin at this point. It was pretty much destroyed. Later, Isengard would be restored to its previous state before Saruman industrialized it, and the tree garth that grew there would become a part of Treebeard's realm. Next question. Did hobbits ever become addicted to smoking? I don't think that Tolkien had any conception of nicotine addiction. Tolkien's hobbits smoked because he smoked, and his stories were written at a time that people did not generally regard smoking tobacco as being harmful or addictive. There at least appears to be a little bit of subtext in there, probably unintentional, about Gandalf puffing away and Saruman being upset about it. I talked about that a little while ago. He looked down on Gandalf for smoking, but he developed his own habit, and he kept it a secret. He thought it was shameful, I guess. And Legolas seems to think that smoking is very strange. Tolkien's hobbits are just like him. They prefer simple foods, they love mushrooms, they smoke tobacco, and they love the countryside and nature. Now, for the record, pipeweed is indeed tobacco, not any form of marijuana, as the meme would suggest. As stated by Tolkien, it was a form of nicotiana that was brought from Numenor to Middle-earth, and it was originally called Westman's weed. It was appreciated mostly for its aroma, and it was not smoked until hobbits started harvesting it and discovered these properties. It is hinted that men also smoke, or at least Aragorn certainly does, though that may be a habit that he might have picked up from Gandalf, who himself picked it up from the hobbits. So either way, no one ever falls victim to any ill effects from smoking, of which the negative effects started coming more to light in the mid-1960s, which was after The Hobbit had been released and after The Lord of the Rings had been released. It is seen as a very normal and expected habit among the hobbits, and unusual by the elves. It was seen as normal by most people who weren't elves, and it was beloved by Gandalf. The closest to sort of like a nick fit that anybody had would be Gandalf stating that he needed to smoke to clear his mind when they were in Moria, and he was rather ill-tempered at this point, but I would attribute that less to nicotine withdrawal and more to the fact that he was lost and he hadn't smoked in a while and he was just frustrated. Okay, next question. Okay, so this one comes in from Simon Cook, and we talked a little bit about the nature of evil before, and I said it sort of becomes a philosophical discussion at that point. And this next question is very much in that vein. Why didn't Eru just destroy Morgoth? Or why didn't God destroy Satan? It's because he knows how it ends. Melkor loses. He told him this very early on, that there is nothing that Melkor can do to diminish the beauty of his creation. He can only add to it. Ilúvatar told Melkor after the Elendil exactly how it was. I'm going to read you the relevant passage here. And thou, Melkor, shall see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth his shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful which he himself had not imagined. Melkor and his rebellion are part of it, and will only make his wondrous creation even greater. His evil deeds will inspire good. The danger he creates inspires courage. There's absolutely nothing that he could do that matters on the grand scheme of things. The Ainur in general miss this message, at least at first. Melkor, most of all, he just wished to prove his creator wrong and wreck creation, but of course he completely failed. It is discussed and reflected on a bit later. I'm going to read you that passage as well. And Ilúvatar spoke to Ulmo, and he said, Seest thou not how here in this little realm in the deeps of time Melkor hath made war upon thy province? He hath bethought of him bitter cold immoderate, and yet hath not he destroyed the beauty of thy fountains, nor of thy clear pools. Behold the snow, and the cunning work of frost. Melkor hath devised heats and fire without restraint, and hath not dried up thy desire, nor utterly quelled the music of the seas. Behold, rather, the height and glory of the clouds and the ever-changing mists, and listen to the fall of rain upon the earth. And in these clouds thou art drawn nearer to Manwe, thy friend whom thou lovest. So Melkor tried to invent something to really muck up creation. Bad weather. He created bitter cold, and from that we got beautiful snow. The clouds gave rain and brought Ulmo and Manwe closer, for the dominion of Ulmo was that of water, and the dominion of Manwe was that of air. Everything evil, every evil act that Melkor wrought had unintentional good consequences that he couldn't conceive. He couldn't foresee them. The closest that Melkor came to having an actual devastating effect without a positive side effect would be his most evil act, the marring of the mind of Feanor, but it set off a chain of events that led to the birth of Eärendil and his coming to Valinor and the eventual War of Wrath that finally defeated Melkor. So aside from all this, Melkor was one of the Valar, and his power was also too deeply rooted in the world. He could not be destroyed without the world itself also being destroyed. So that's another reason why not. Okay, next question. Why did Gandalf prioritize Saruman over Frodo in the Fellowship of the Ring? So here's the one from the thumbnail. So it kind of seems like he hears about Saruman and he just jets off and he sort of leaves Frodo high and dry. To put it simply, Saruman was his boss. He didn't exactly leave Frodo high and dry, although it seemed that way. But when the White summons you, you come. And Gandalf, of course, did not know that he was being led into a trap. Gandalf was on his way to the Shire when he met Radagast the Brown on the road, who had been waiting for him. Radagast also had no idea what nefarious things Saruman was up to, and he was asked to find Gandalf and tell him to immediately travel to Isengard to seek counsel. Gandalf wanders around a lot. He's a gentleman of no fixed address, so Radagast did not know where to find him, but he figured if he parked himself right outside the Shire, he was bound to run into him eventually. So Gandalf immediately saw this as a pressing matter before Radagast even told him why he was there, because Radagast was also a traveler, a nomad, so to park himself in one spot and wait like he did it must have been something very important. So Radagast's message from Saruman was specifically designed to make Gandalf drop everything and haul his butt to Isengard. I'm going to read you that relevant section of the Fellowship of the Ring. I have been told somewhere, wherever they go, the riders ask for news of a land called Shire. The Shire, I said, but my heart sank, for even the wise might fear to withstand the Nine when they are gathered together under their fell chieftain. A great king and sorcerer he was of old, and he wields a deadly fear. Who told you and who sent you? I asked. Saruman the White, answered Radagast. And he told me to say that if you feel the need, he will help, but you must seek his aid at once, or it will be too late. And that message brought me hope, for Saruman the White is the greatest of my order. Radagast is, of course, a worthy wizard, a master of shapes and changes of hue, and he has much lore of herbs and beasts, and birds are especially his friends. But Saruman has long studied the arts of the enemy himself, and thus we have often been able to forestall him. It was by the devices of Saruman that we drove him from Dol Guldur. It might be that he had found some weapons that would drive back the Nine. I will go to Saruman, I said. Then you must go now, said Radagast, for I have wasted time in looking for you, and the days are running short. I was told to find you before midsummer, and that is now here. Even if you set out from this spot, you will hardly reach him before the Nine discover the land that they seek. I myself shall turn back at once. And with that he mounted, and would have ridden straight off. Stay a moment, I said. We shall need your help, and the help of all things that will give it. Send out messages to all the beasts and birds that are your friends. Tell them to bring news of anything that bears on this matter to Saruman and Gandalf. Let messages be sent to Orthanc. I will do that, he said, and rode off, as if the Nine were after him. So the message was very manipulative. Saruman is offering his help. He knows what's up. And even that Gandalf would be around the Shire, and then Gandalf must come quickly, as too much time has been wasted. So Gandalf greatly desired the help of Saruman, so he saw this as a great opportunity, though of course it didn't work out very well in the end. He did not leave Frodo in the lurch, as he did write him a letter instructing him to leave immediately and meet him on the road, but his detainment prevented the meeting, and Barlaman forgetting to send the letter, well, as I mentioned earlier, that threw a wrench in things as well. So thankfully Gandalf had the foresight to ask Radagast to send a messenger bringing and seeking news to Orthanc, and Radagast had to be very extra because he sent Gwaihir, or he asked Gwaihir, I should say, and Gwaihir agreed to go. Okay, next question. What terrestrial metal most closely resembles Mithril from the Lord of the Rings? I would say probably titanium. Mithril is called true silver. Even the word Mithril, myth is gray, and ril is brilliance, shining brilliance. So it's like shining gray, silver. And it's similar in looks to silver, but it never tarnishes, and it's lighter than silver and it's stronger than silver. It also contains some magical properties, but if we take away the magical properties, we're left with a silvery metal that is light and strong, and I would say that titanium is the closest real-life analog. Okay, and that question, by the way, was from request of Max Will. All right, next question. How did Isildur obtain the One Ring? Was its power too much for him to handle, as he was not a bearer like Bilbo or Frodo? Okay, a lot of things to say here. Isildur obtained the One Ring in a very direct fashion. He took it right from Sauron. Thanks to the films, most people imagine the scene. It looks something like this. This is inaccurate. It shows Sauron seemingly triumphant over Isildur in battle, and he's about to strike him down, and Isildur is flailing with the Shard of Narsil, and he gets lucky, just like in the movie. The actual scene was more like this. Sauron was well defeated at this point. He did not battle Isildur, but he battled his father, Elendil, as well as Gil-galad, and at the end of the battle, all three of them meant mutual destruction, though only Elendil would of course pass away. Gil-galad would pass into the west, and Sauron is an eternal angel, and he can actually die, so he would just return in due time. Isildur used the Shard of Narsil to cut the ring from Sauron's finger, delaying his return for a bit. The One Ring wasn't too strong for Isildur, or at least, that is true. It's more accurate to say that Isildur was too strong for the One Ring. He wasn't corrupted by it, and unlike other bearers, actually attempted to master the ring and bend it to his will. It didn't work. Isildur could not master the ring, nor could it master him. The One Ring fought against Isildur in a very direct way. While others, it would attempt to slip from them, or with Gollum, eventually he found the ring uncomfortable against his skin, but Isildur, after just a few short years, found the One Ring incredibly painful to touch. The One Ring could not dominate Isildur, and Isildur could not dominate the One Ring. In the end, Isildur realized that Elrond was wrong the whole time. He was correct that it should be destroyed. And he was actually on his way to Imladris, that's Rivendell, to discuss this matter when he was ambushed and he died. The ring had abandoned him as he swam. He was never not a bearer, as stated in the question. A bearer is just someone who bears something, and he certainly bore the ring. Okay, last question. And I was incorrect there. We have 2 more questions, but here's the second, the penultimate question here. Why do Sylvan elves allow Oropher and his other Sindarin households to rule over them in Greenwood the Great? Can anyone speculate or provide an analysis? Okay, so there's really kind of 2 reasons, because there's sort of 2 instances of this happening in a major way. Greenwood the Great is one, of course. The Sylvan elves were anywhere that there were woods and elves, and they were wood elves at heart, but the 2 major enclaves that were ruled over by the Sindar would be the Woodland Realm, as you mentioned, Greenwood the Great, later Mirkwood, and Lothlorien. So in the case of the Woodland Realm, we had a case of the Sindar elves, who were led by Oropher, being the refugees of the fall of Doriath, and they came to live with the Sylvan elves in Greenwood. It isn't said exactly why the Greenwood elves took so easily to Oropher as their ruler, but it was said that their culture was rude and rustic compared to the Beleriand refugees, but that these great and tall elves, Oropher being kin to Ilúthingol himself, quickly adapted themselves to the Sylvan way of life. I think they just appreciated each other. The Sylvan elves saw them as tall and great and brave and noble and kingly, while the Sindar elves saw this more rustic lifestyle that the Sylvan elves had and said, "This is great." And they made it their own culture. This may just be a case of gravitating towards natural leaders who could bring them together, keep them safe, and not only would they not interrupt or try to subvert their way of life, but actually were willing to live as they did. In Lothlorien, it was a little bit different. It seemed the Sindar were always in charge there. Originally, it was Andir and his son Amroth after him. And the land was originally named after Amroth, and they were both Sindar, but their subjects were largely Sylvan. And Tolkien never mentioned exactly how this came to be. Where did Amdir come from, or how did he come to lead a group of Sylvan elves? We aren't told these things, but it seems similar in a situation to that of the Woodland Realm. Amdir became a great friend of Tar Adarian of Numenor. I mentioned him earlier. And he was persuaded to join the later last alliance of elves and men in friendship with the men of Numenor, though Amdir refused to take any direction from the Noldor king Gil-galad. It may just be a similarity of attitude, that they wish to live their simple, woodsy life and not have anything to do with the high elves. And thus it's another case of a noble Sindar elf just sharing a similar personality with the Sylvan people, and he was adopted as their leader. Amdir did not survive the war against Sauron, and his son Amroth later perished after a disastrous attempt to sail to the west. The Sylvan elves chose the newly arrived Galadriel and Celeborn as their leaders. Now, Galadriel is Noldor, and Celeborn's Sindar, but they rejected royal titles. Instead, they were the Lord and the Lady, though many in Middle-earth refer to them as a king and a queen. In this case, Galadriel, I think they gravitated more towards her because she was able to protect them with implements such as the Elisar and her Ring of Power. Okay, this time for real, last question. So this is a sort of similar question to why did Gandalf sort of leave Frodo in the lurch by going to Saruman except this is at the end of the story. Why did Gandalf leave Frodo and the hobbits to fight a war in the Shire? It's because he knew they could handle it, and he was not going to be there forever to protect them. It was only a mild surprise to the hobbits what was going on. They were told very directly by Gandalf that Saruman was up to no good. They also could handle it on their own, which was important because Gandalf was going to be leaving Middle-earth. Gandalf's part in Middle-earth was done. He tarried for a time to speak with Bombadil and to put certain affairs in order, but he had fulfilled his goals and thus was filled with the sea longing, the urge to travel back home to Valinor. This would leave hobbits without their great protector, and though they certainly could have relied on Aragorn to protect them, they were a free land but still technically his subjects. Minas Tirith was very far away. The Shire had to exist without Gandalf and to be autonomous. And they proved that they had what it takes. All it took was some of them gaining important experiences. The 4 returned as war veterans, heroes, and 2 of them were knights of the realm. Merry was a knight of Rohan, and Pippin was a knight of Gondor. There was already resistance in the Shire against Saruman. The Lobelia Sackville Baggins, she was very old. Will Woodfoot, he was no warrior. Farmer Cotton, he's a farmer. But having some very important hobbits return with weapons and armor and great titles and greater words stirred them to resistance, and they won the battle, though at some loss of life. Of course, Gandalf could have swept in and easily taken care of things for them with no loss of life, but what happens then when the next tyrant comes and they have not learned the bravery to defend themselves? Nothing good, I'd wager. So anyway, thank you guys for all your questions. And thank you guys for all your support, especially my members. There are 4 of you now, and I hope for more. Consider membership, because it helps me out in a major way. You will gain a really cool badge, which will evolve over time as you renew your membership. It will grow little pieces, as you'll see, and you'll get some emotes that you could use in chat. And we are going to be doing streams on this channel occasionally, and I'm going to be talking about that more very soon. You're going to be seeing some streams from myself and from some other Tolkien scholars that are going to be joining me here on the channel. So it's a very exciting time. And if you join as a member, you also will get to see all of the videos early. And I'm actually sort of getting into a rhythm where you will probably get to see them 6 or even 7 days early, so that's pretty exciting. So anyway, send me some questions, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, hit the like button, leave me a comment. Comments are important, engagement is important, and I'll see you guys next time.